Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my September wrap up as well as my October TBR. We're gonna be mushing them together this month because I feel like it. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing all the books I read throughout the month of September as well as all the books I want to read in the month of October, which I'm very excited about. October is spooky season, it's cozy season. I feel like it's the best time of year to be curling up in bed, reading books, going to the bookstores. Cozy fall season is just the best season for book lovers. In the month of September, I read a total of 7 books, which is pretty average for me. I average around 6 to 8 books every single month. I feel like 2023 overall has been such a good year for me reading wise because last year I had a lot of months where I either read only one book, I didn't read any books. I feel like I was going into a lot of reading slumps last year, and this year I feel like I've consistently been reading 6 to 9 books every month. That's pretty amazing for me, if I do say so myself. Also, something I like to say in every single wrap up I do is it doesn't matter how many books you read every month. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. So as long as you read at least one good book that you actually enjoyed every month, it's a win. 7 books in 1 month is pretty good for me. We have 2 new releases in here that I read, and then we have some older books in here, and yeah, we are gonna jump right into it. Also, I've heard you guys, I listened to your comments. This is why I love when you guys comment on my videos and give me tips and pointers when it comes to filming these for you. But I'm gonna be doing the title of the book, the rating, the spice rating, and the genre in somewhere on the screen. You will see that because a lot of you were requesting me to do spice rating on books. I'm always getting questions on age ratings as well, so I'll try to add that in too. But we can hop right into it. I read some pretty good books in the month of September. To be honest, they were all hits except like one that I was like on the edge with. I was going back and forth with it. I was reading it, I just couldn't get into it, and then towards the end I really got into it, but we'll talk about that roller coaster when we get to it. The first book I read and finished in the month of September is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This is actually a book I carried over from the month of August. I started it like the last few days in August, and then I just carried it over to September. This is such a fun and cool read in my opinion. I randomly picked it up at Barnes one day because it was on the new release table. It actually was put out at Barnes like 2 weeks early before its official release date, which I thought was really interesting. But what drew me to this book was obviously this cover is so stunning. It's so fun. There's so much going on. The edges are also sprayed. I don't know why, but I thought that was really cool, and that's another reason why I picked it up. And then of course the title, Assistant to the Villain, it just sounded really fun and interesting. As I was reading it, I was researching little things about it, and a lot of you had actually told me that this originally started as a TikTok series during 2020. The author got so much good feedback that she decided to turn it into a full-on book. Assistant to the Villain is exactly what it sounds like. It's about an assistant to the villain. This book definitely gives off fairy tale vibes. It's about this girl Evie who is living in a kingdom, and during this time period that we're in, there's like some really bad sickness going around the kingdom. It kind of reminded me of like the plague, honestly. Evie's father gets very sick, so she has to go out and find work to support her family. She starts working one place and then she ends up leaving it because of some crazy stuff that happens there. She is trying to find work as fast as she can, and one day she lands in the hands of the villain. For some crazy reason, he decides to offer her a job to be his assistant. So this whole story is basically about Evie assisting the villain. It's a lot of, you know, like paper pushing and having his back, making sure that, you know, no one's trailing him or tracking him. Very interesting, I have to say. It's not what I thought it was gonna be about. I also thought this was gonna be like an enemies to lovers book, which it totally wasn't. There was no enemies to lovers in here. It was more so a grumpy meets sunshine type of trope. Evie is very much sunshine vibes, whereas the villain, of course, is a total grump in the story. There's a lot of gruesome, bad things that the villain does, and no matter how bad they get, Evie just never gets scared. She never shies away from them. That definitely intrigues the villain. He's like, why isn't this girl like scared of me like everyone else is? Instead of being scared, Evie's more so fascinated with him and his mind and where all of this anger is coming from. So along with that, there is like a storyline to it, and it's the villain trying to get back at the prince or the king in the story. I can't quite remember. They're in this weird battle against one another. So one of my favorite parts of this story though was definitely the inner dialogue we get from Evie. It's very funny and witty, kind of silly. There's a lot of moments where Evie is just like talking to herself and she just says really funny things. I didn't know going into this that it was going to be like a comedic type of read. There's definitely moments throughout this book where I was literally laughing out loud. I was like, wow, that is actually pretty realistic. Like I would be thinking or saying the same exact thing as her. And I love that. I loved Evie's character. I just thought she was hilarious. She's probably like one of my favorite female characters I've read about in a very long time. As for the romance aspect of this, there is a romance in this series, and I hope we see more of it throughout book 2 and book 3 when it comes out. This book definitely has that super slow burn. There's this tension between Evie and the villain throughout the entire story, and I just remember reading this and waiting every chapter for something crazy to happen, and I just feel like we never got to that epic point that I was kind of waiting for and expecting. There were a lot of points throughout reading this where I was like, okay, when are we gonna start romance in here? That definitely kind of set me off while reading this. There wasn't as much romance in it as I was hoping. With that being said, I ended up rating this, I think, 3.5 stars, and that's still a really good rating for me. It would have easily been like a 4-star read. It was just missing like that extra romance that I was hoping for. But I do feel like we're gonna see a lot more of it in book 2, and also the way this left off, it leaves off on a cliffhanger. And when I finished this book, I immediately ran online and started researching when book 2 was coming out, and I think it said it's coming out at the end of next year, and I wanted to cry. I don't want to wait a whole year because the story was really good, and the way it ended off, I was just like, oh my gosh. I feel like with fantasy books, your heart is always ripped out at the end and left on a cliffhanger, and then you have to wait for the second book. But nonetheless, this was actually really, really good. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're in it to like fairy tale fantasy vibe, but you want a twist on it. You want the villain's perspective, because the villain in this was also just like chef's kiss. He was absolutely perfect. He was grumpy but super overprotective of Evie. You could tell that he cared for her deeply, but at the same time he kept holding back because he's the villain and he feels like he's not good enough. Totally worth it. I highly recommend. Next, in the month of September, I decided to pick up book 2 of the Knock 'Em Out series. It's Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score. This is one of my favorite book covers that I own. I just think it's so stunning. I'm such a sucker for a good pink book, honestly. This is Nash and Lena's story though. I remember starting this book and being like, okay, I just want to get this over with because book 3 in the series came out in September, and I just wanted to jump to book 3 so bad, but I had to read book 2 first. I couldn't just skip Nash and Lena's story. And so I remember going into it being like, okay, let's get this over with. I want to fly through this so I can get to book 3. I cared about Nash's story, but not as much as most people probably did. But Nash is the younger brother to Knox, who we meet in book 1 and Things We Never Got Over. Nash is like a goody two-shoes. He's a police officer, and he actually goes through a lot of traumatizing things in book 1 that kind of lead in to book 2. So we're kind of watching Nash deal with these things that happened. And then we have Miss Lena, who comes into town. She's definitely like the badass in the story. She's like the bad girl, I guess you could say. I have to say, I ended up loving this so much more than I thought I would, and it honestly may be like my favorite book out of the series. I loved Nash and Lena's story. I love that there was an enemies to lovers in here. I just loved how like their characters were so opposite for each other. At the same time, they just fit perfectly together. Throughout this story though, Nash is trying to find a bad guy that we meet in book 1. Lena comes into town on her own mission for her own job, and it ties in to what Nash is doing. So that's where we see Nash and Lena kind of butt heads. It's definitely with their work. Technically start off as friends in the beginning, and then they go into enemies, and then they go into lovers. So it's like a friends to enemies to lovers trope, which I thought was really interesting and fun. I have to say, like the first 150 pages of this book were definitely slower for me. There's a lot of world building and character building, and it's definitely slow, and I definitely got bored. But once I hit like 150 pages in, the story took off, and I was so invested in Lena and Nash. The found family in this is probably one of my favorite found families. You really see all the same characters from book 1 throughout this story, and it's not just like a little pop in here and there. I feel like they're in the majority of this book, which I really enjoyed. And I don't know, I really like Nash and Lena's story. I thought the romance was perfect. I ended up rating this 4 stars to my surprise, because again, going into it, I was like, I'm probably not gonna be too crazy about it, but then I ended up being very crazy about it. So this was 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. I also really love this because throughout it, we get little glimpses into Lucian and Sloane's story, which book 3 is all about Lucian and Sloane, Things We Left Behind. This is the book that I have been waiting so long for. When I read Things We Never Got Over, which is book 1, I knew immediately Lucian and Sloane were gonna be me my favorite couple out of the whole series. Everything about them, it just seemed so perfect to me. It takes place in a small town. It's an enemies to lovers. Sloane is this cutie little librarian. Lucian is like some big time businessman that everyone's kind of afraid of because he's kind of got this dangerous side to him. I just knew from reading about them in the first 2 books that they were going to be my favorite. Finally, we got to Things We Left Behind in the month of September, and one plus is that this cover is absolutely stunning, and this is like a Barnes & Noble special edition, so it has like a shimmer to the letters. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but the letters shimmer. And another really cool thing is that this is digitally signed by Lucy herself, which I thought was really cool. But Things We Left Behind is all about Lucian and Sloane's story. They are like a friends to enemies to lovers trope. It's a second chance trope because Lucian and Sloane actually grew up together next door to each other, and then something crazy horrible happened and it caused Lucian and Sloane to like hate each other basically and despise each other, so they just instantly became enemies. No matter how much they try to avoid each other or stay away from each other, they're always kind of thrown together because they're in the same friend group. I was definitely really disappointed reading this, and I feel like maybe it's because we all were so excited for their story and we all were hyping it up so much, so therefore we all went in with very unrealistic expectations. I thought I was going to DNF it, to be completely honest. I really thought I wasn't going to get through this book because I dreaded picking it up every single night when I would go to read it. It's such a slow book. Honestly, the last 100 pages of this book is what saved it for me. The epilogue and then the bonus epilogue is like the best part out of this whole book. I read this whole book just to read the epilogue and bonus epilogue. It made my heart so happy seeing all the couples come back together. It was such a sweet ending. I thought it was a really good closeout to the Knock 'Em Out series. I also felt like what happened between Lucian and Sloane that caused them to like become enemies in the story, like I understood it. I understood it from both sides, but it was just so frustrating to read like 300 pages about how much they despised each other because of something that happened so many years ago. I don't know. This book was like, it was good. It just wasn't what I expected. Like I said, the last 100 pages like saved it for me, and I did end up giving it 4 stars. And I was really on the edge of a 3-star rating and a 4-star rating, but I decided that the story overall was very good. I feel like we finally got closure to like Lucian and Sloane's story, and we had a better understanding of Lucian's story. Even though it wasn't what I was expecting or hoping for, it was still a really good storyline. I thought the romance was good. I just wish it wasn't so slow. And I feel like honestly with the entire Knock 'Em Out series, the first 100 pages of every book are so slow for me. I just don't get into them as fast as other people do for some reason, and I think it's because they're so slow in the beginning. If you think about it, I feel like these books are ridiculously chunky for just being romance books. If they were like fantasy books, I would get it, but they're romance books. Like how much romancing can we do? You know? I don't know. I'm still really torn about it, as you guys can probably tell. Because that book took me so long to get through, I think it took like a week and a half for me to read, I decided to jump back into a series that I have not read since the beginning of this year. I read like book 1 in January. I think it may have been my first book of 2023, honestly. And I decided to jump in to the next book in that series, and then that actually turned into me jumping into the next 3 books in the series. I literally kept going because I was so sucked in. So after Things We Left Behind, I ended up continuing the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark, and book 2 is Stolen Heir. They are like dark mafia romance books, and for some reason I just haven't been in the mood for them. I finally decided to jump into them because I remember really liking Brutal Prince in the beginning of the year, and I remember it being a very fast and easygoing read. I remember it being really thrilling and exciting, and I feel like I needed something fun and fast paced after reading Things We Left Behind. So I decided to pick up Stolen Heir, hoping it would kind of pull me out of that little rut. This was actually really good. In the beginning part, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this book. This is really twisted and messed up, but I ended up actually loving this so much, and I can't decide if I liked it more than book 1. Like I'm kind of on the fence because I really liked book 1 too, but this is actually a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It's about Nessa Griffin, who is the baby sister to Callum, who book 1 is all about, and then Miko, who is a gangster in Chicago. I think he's Polish. I really liked how this book kind of stemmed off of book 1. The way the books connected was really interesting to me. Basically, this starts with Miko being very angry and seeking revenge on the Griffins because they took something away from him that they can never give back, and so he wants to take something away from them that will hurt them just as much. So he decides to kidnap their youngest daughter, Nessa Griffin. Their story is so It's so twisted. It's so messed up and twisted. Like I said, I don't know. I just remember starting this and being like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna like this. This is gonna be a really bad rating. And then it literally gets like 100 pages in and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't put this down. Like I liked this book so much, I almost felt like a bad person at the end of it. I feel like Sophie Lark books are not for the weak. And I mean that in the best and nicest way possible. But her books definitely have like this dark, twisted vibe to them. You feel like you shouldn't like, but you end up loving them regardless. As time goes by, we kind of see this weird tension grow between Nessa and Miko, and I don't know, you get a lot of backstory on who Miko is and where he came from and what's happened to him in his life, and you feel really, really bad for him and you understand like his actions for everything. I honestly really, really liked this. I liked Miko's story, even though he comes across as like the bad guy in this and as a villain. I mean, he literally kidnaps Nessa. There's a lot of things he does throughout the story and you're like, oh my gosh, he's such a good person. I ended up rating this 4 stars though. This was a really, really good one. You go into this thinking there's no way you're gonna like it. There's no way you're gonna fall in love with Miko. And then by the end of it, you're obsessed with him and you love the story and you're rooting for Nessa and Miko in the end, and it's crazy. The story is crazy. I enjoyed that book so much though that I decided to jump in to book 3, which is Savage Lover. Something I really love about these books is that they revolve around 2 families. You see all the same characters in every book. In Stolen Air, we got to see a lot of Cal and Ada throughout this, which I really like. And then in Savage Lover, this is actually about Ada's brother Nero, and you get to see Ada and Cal again. You see other family members. If you're not familiar with the Brutal Birthright series, it basically revolves around 2 mafia families in Chicago. There's an Italian mafia family and then there's an Irish mafia family, and every single book focuses on one of the siblings kind of finding love and finding themselves. The books are really, really interesting. There's so much character development and building throughout them that I just really, really love. In a lot of dark romances, you don't typically get that. Savage Lover is book 3 in the series. It's about Nero. He's a Gallo. He's a part of the Italian mafia family. His character is really cute. He's very obsessed with cars and rebuilding them and collecting them. So something I really, really enjoyed about this was it gives off a lot of Fast and Furious vibes, which I thought was really fun. There's a lot of action in here, like car races and stuff like that. He meets a girl though who is actually working as a mechanic at her father's car shop, and so she's also very much into cars. She appreciates them a lot. They both went to high school together, and I think she was kind of outcasted and people made fun of her. And then sometime after high school, she starts coming out a little bit more because of her younger brother, who is kind of mixing in the wrong crowd. So she's trying to kind of get him out of that crowd, but while trying to protect her little brother, she kind of gets mixed up in some crazy stuff. Her and Nero's worlds end up colliding. You see these 2 characters start bonding over their love for cars, and it's really cool. I actually really like this story. It definitely wasn't as much of a dark romance as the other books I've read so far, but it was still really cute. So this ended up being another 4-star read for me. I really, really enjoyed it, and I kind of enjoyed that it wasn't so much like a dark romance. It was a nice little break in between the series because the first 2 books were very dark and twisted. So to get that little break in book 3 and then to jump into book 4, I feel like it was really nice. After that one, I did jump into Bloody Heart. This is Dante's story, and he's the oldest Gallo brother. This one was so good because it's like a second chance romance, and it actually begins like back in time, which I really, really like. Basically, we're seeing a young Dante falling in love for the first time with a girl named Simone. She is totally wrong for him and he is totally wrong for her. Totally different families, different vibes, but nonetheless they are drawn together, and we watch them become each other's first loves, and then something crazy and tragic happens, and then we don't get to see them together again for I think like 9 or 10 years. I thought this was a really cute second chance romance though. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't even see it coming though. I totally forgot that throughout the first like 2 or 3 books we get glimpses into Dante, and they keep mentioning how he's like super hung up on a girl he used to be in love with, and now in book 4 we finally get to meet that girl. I do feel like there were parts of the story that felt very rushed, but at the same time I feel like every book in this series kind of gets to a point where we do rush a little bit and we do skip over a lot of things, but that's what kind of keeps them exciting and mysterious in my opinion. You're kind of left wondering what if at the end of every book, and I do really like that with these books because there's just so many things that could happen. I really love Dante's story. I thought him and Simone were absolutely adorable. If you're really big into dark romance, like you'll love that series. To end off the month of September and to also kind of branch us in to my October TBR, we have A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 3 in the ACOTAR series. I am so happy about this book because I started A Court of Thorns and Roses in the beginning of this year. I read A Court of Mist and Fury, I think right after that, and then I took a break because this is a really chunky book. Chunky books intimidate me. I talk about this all the time on my channel. Chunky books just scare the heck out of me because I don't like reading a book for more than a week for some reason. It just kind of bothers me and I feel like I get bored and I start to get into a weird reading slump. That's why I've put off book 3 for so long, but I decided in the month of September to jump back into the series because so many people have been saying how book 3 is so amazing and there's so much like character building in book 3 that really just starts to tie everything together. I almost feel like book 3 is becoming my favorite book over book 2 because of the character development and character building we're getting in this. We're getting an insight into so many characters in this book that I really love and appreciate. I actually have a few more chapters left of this, so I am carrying it in to the month of October, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I have been really enjoying it. I started this book a little bit ago and I remember like in the beginning I was like, I'm not gonna like this book, I'm not gonna know what's going on, and then I got like 50 pages in and I was sucked in. I am literally obsessing over these characters all over again. I am falling in love with all of them again. And honestly, like reading this made me realize how much I miss this world and miss these characters. Starting off with this though, I actually listened to like the dramatized audiobook version because so many people were saying that I had to try it out, that it's so cool, and it's so cool. Like I actually love it so much. I started it and I think like the first like half hour I was like, I don't think I could do this. I don't like it because there's a lot of sound effects, there's music, it's a full cast, so there's different voices for every character. Like the first half hour of it, I just couldn't get into it. It sounded really weird to me and it does sound very much like you're listening to a movie, and I think maybe that's why it was really weird for me. It's actually so cool. I highly recommend it if you have not tried it out yet for this series, and I think it's really cool that there's like a full cast for all the characters because I feel like it helps you kind of keep track of everything better and understand it more. I remember when I was reading book 1, I was getting so lost and confused between all the characters and all the places, but with the dramatized audiobook, I'm able to keep track of all the characters so much easier because they each have their own individual voices now, and I just love that so much. I feel like the sound effects and the music just really set the tone in the scenes, and it was so cool. Something else I'm really loving about this is how much we're learning about all the other characters, all the Bat Boys, the sisters. This has been such a fun book and I'm so excited to wrap it up in October. I feel like this book is just really getting me, and I can already tell it's gonna be either a 4 or 5-star read. So branching off of A Court in Wings and Ruin, that brings us in to my October TBR. These are gonna be all the books that I plan to read in the month of October. I do have a little stack of books here. These aren't necessarily like all the books I plan to read in October. These are just books that are set on my list that I definitely want to get to in October, but I know there's gonna be some other books thrown in there throughout the month. We're gonna start with A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 4 in the ACOTAR series. I'm very excited to see what happens in this, especially after finishing A Court of Wings and Ruin. I definitely want to jump right into this. I've heard really good things about this one though, and then after this one we have A Court of Silver Flames, and that's the last book in the series for right now because supposedly Sarah J. Maas is coming out with another book in the series, but my goal for 2023 is to complete the ACOTAR series, so fingers crossed so we can make it. Next up I have Broken Vow and Heavy Crown. These are both by Sophie Lark, and these are actually the last 2 books in the Brutal Birthright series. It's another series that I did want to complete in 2023. I love Sophie Lark's writing style. I fly through her books so fast because I start to read them and I literally can't put them down. I'm like sucked into the stories immediately, and I love when books do that. I love when they suck you in and you don't want to put them down. Broken Vow tells the story of Riona, I believe. She's a griffin, and then Heavy Crown tells the story of Sebastian. I think his name's Sebastian. He's the last Gallo in the family to find love. So such a crazy twisted series, but there's something so fun and exciting about them that has made it one of my favorite series of 2023. Next up we have the very long awaited Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. This has been such a highly requested book on my channel, and we're finally here. It's fall, it's cozy season, it's spooky season. It is the perfect time of year to jump back in to the Harry Potter world. I remember when I was younger dressing up and going to all the movie premieres, and my sister's like the biggest Harry Potter fan, so I was definitely in that world growing up because of her. I still love it today. I'm a big Harry Potter fan, so I'm very excited to jump back into this world. Following that we have Pestilence by Laura Thalassa. This is book 1 in the 4 Horsemen series. I decided to throw this on my October TBR because I just picked this book up up last month. And I'm not too familiar with the series. I haven't seen too many reviews or things about it, so I definitely want to jump into it in October and give it a try. The series revolves around the four horsemen and how they come to Earth to basically end humanity. There's a lot of romancing in them, so I'm very excited to jump into this series and see what it's all about. Next up, I have Wildfire by Hannah Grace. This is a new release that just came out this month, so it is definitely one of my most anticipated reads of October. I read book 1, which is Icebreaker, earlier this year. It's one of my favorite books ever. It was a 5-star read. I still think about Nate Hawkins daily. I just thought it was a really good romance. It kind of reminded me of The Deal by Elle Kennedy, and I think that's why I loved it so much. So I'm really excited to see how Wildfire goes. Just from the cover, you can tell it's going to take place at a camp. The two main characters are Russ and Aurora, and they're basically like camp counselors during the summer. And I think what happens is they end up having like a one-night stand before they find out that they're actually going to be camp counselors together, and like a whole bunch of crazy stuff happens. I can't wait to read it though. Next, I have A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This is a new book that I just received out of my Owl Crate box, so I'm very excited about this. And then I also have their adult fantasy book, which is After the Forest by Kel Woods. This sounds so fun to me. It's supposed to tell the story of what happens after a fairy tale ends, which sounds kind of creepy and dark. What happens after a fairy tale ends? I never really thought about that. I don't know. It just sounds really cool. The back says you cannot keep a witch from her nature. Sooner or later, it will bite back. So I feel like this is going to be perfect for the month of October. It gives off all the witchy vibes. It also has sprayed edges, which I really like. I think the artwork in this one is also really fun. It gives you an idea of what the characters are going to look like. Going into this, I have no idea what it's going to be about, but I'm very intrigued. And then last but not least, I have 2 more books that are on my October TBR that are coming out this month. The first one is King of Greed by Anna Hong. I'm so excited. That is book 3 in the Kings of Sin series, and I cannot wait for that book. I just read King of Pride like a month or 2 ago, and I fell madly in love with Kai's story. He's probably one of my favorite characters that she has like ever written, but then again, I'm obsessed with anything she writes. So I'm sure King of Greed will be absolutely amazing. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be like a second chance romance. Dominic is a workaholic, and in the process of building his empire, he has basically lost his wife because he doesn't pay any attention to her. And when she finally confronts him and is like, I don't want to be with you anymore because you don't pay any attention to me, things start to take a turn for him, and he starts to realize that he's losing the only thing he's ever really cared about. That's what King of Greed is supposed to be about. I'm really excited for it. And then the last book I have on my October TBR is Hopeless by Elsie Silver. We are finally getting Beau's story, and I am so excited for it. The Chestnut Spring series has been such a life-changing book series this year for me. I have fallen madly in love with that series. It is still like my favorite series of 2023. I feel like I don't have a book series that has topped it just yet. At least one of that size. This is gonna be book 5 in the series. There obviously are book series that I've read this year that are only like duologies that I am obsessed with, but if we're talking about like bigger book series that are like 4 or 5 books, the Chestnut Spring series is like my favorite series. Has my heart. I'm so excited for this last book to come out. But that is all for my September wrap up, my October TBR. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. I'm hoping we have another really good reading month in October. For me to read 7 books in September while also having such big chunky books, I feel like that's pretty good for me. I feel like that's a really good accomplishment for me. But for today's video, comment down below what your favorite book of September was. What book did you read in September that you absolutely loved and would recommend to other people? It's kind of hard. I'm kind of torn between Things We Hide from the Light and Assistant to the Villain. Things We Hide from the Light was really good, and I loved the romance in it, but Assistant to the Villain was so different for me, and I really enjoyed like the storyline to it. I'm torn between those 2 books being my favorite reads of September. But with all that being said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you had fun. I hope you're able to take away at least 1 new book and place it on your TBR. I am so excited for spooky season and holiday season. I can't believe how fast this year has flown by. It's crazy that we're in the month of October. I feel like it was literally just January, which is so crazy. Like, where has time gone? But I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in my next video. I've been sailing on the wrong course, keeping it together like I did before. Think that I've said this a few times.